The working day begins for one of the men who in Spain are as legendary as they are infamous.
El cobrador del frac en este país es tan conocido como la Coca-Cola. En cuanto te llamas por teléfono a alguien y le dices que eres el cobrador del frac, este individuo ya se pone en tensión.
Debt collectors in tails have been around for 30 years. The company's heyday was during the 2008 financial crisis, when thousands of Spaniards went bankrupt.
Si este señor sigue sin querer reunirse con nosotros, viene la parte que te interesa. Y es que aparece un compañero así disfrazado, con un maletín que lo verás ahora del cobrador del frac, y se posiciona en la puerta de su negocio o en la puerta de su domicilio, de tal suerte que todo el mundo entiende que debes dinero.
Hay una tipología infinita de morosos. Está desde el moroso más noble que se ha arruinado y que no tiene dinero y no puede pagar y te pide por favor que no puede pagar y realmente a ti te da pena y sientes lástima y empatizas con él, hasta el moroso más sinvergüenza que puedas pensar que puede tener 4.000 euros en el bolsillo y no te va a dar ni un céntimo. Hagas lo que hagas.
In the worst cases, debtors are confronted on the street.
Disculpa. Un segundito, por favor.
Today, the whole world is in the same position as the Spaniard who can't pay. Private individuals, companies, and whole countries have been struggling with steadily rising debts for over 15 years. The problem has been severely aggravated by the corona pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Does this mean the world is about to collapse under a huge mountain of debt? The world's total debt currently exceeds $300 trillion. That's a colossal number with 14 zeros. To pay off this debt, everyone in the world would have to work for 3.5 years. To find out what's going on in the world, we decide to explore the stories behind global debt. We want to find out what's happening away from the headlines. We visit people in debt and learn about the dramatic impact it has on their lives. We visit companies whose debts threaten to drive the workforce into poverty. And we go to countries with vast levels of national debt. We want to find out how the lives of ordinary people are affected. Is the situation hopeless? Or are there any ways out of the debt trap? After the financial crisis of 2008, many states fell into debt. Back then, after a phase of unbridled lending in the USA, a property bubble burst. Major banks went bust, and the stock market collapsed. The US government had to take on staggering debts to save the economy. The debt crisis in the USA triggered a global chain reaction that still resonates. To trace the long-term impact of the 2008 crisis, we travel to a country where money seems to be no object. The Emirate of Dubai. There, we meet Sajjad Maroof, an estate agent who wants to show us something exquisite. A map of the world consisting of artificial islands. In 2003, a state-owned corporation began constructing the world islands and selling them to investors. They wanted to build retreats for the super-rich, palaces like this one.
Welcome to Sweden Beach Palace. Welcome to the homes of White King. Only the kings are allowed to stay over here.
The palace provides an astonishing refuge from the outdoor temperatures topping 45 degrees Celsius.
Scandinavian people, they have a tradition to take sauna to open up the body pores, okay? So we have sauna over here. We can make it as a dry or a steam room. Then immediately, when sauna is done, they have to take an ice bath. So we have our own snow room. That's how you enjoy the snow. So the idea was this, how to bring the whole world in Dubai. So that's Spain. You can see Portuguese over there, and that's France.
We try to follow Mr. Marouf's logic, but we find it difficult to make out the outlines of European countries. The sharp contours have been eroded away. Since 2008, the project called The World has lain dormant. Nevertheless, one man still wants to keep building on the artificial islands and create a mini Europe. Josef Kleindienst, an Austrian businessman, has wound up here in the Persian Gulf. Part of his grand vision can already be admired.
Welcome to see our Heart of Europe project. I want to point out first the location where we are right now. We are here in the roof of Sweden Beach Palace #1, overlooking the Germany island, 32 villas on beach and pool. And you can see the Strandkörbe are already waiting for tourists. You see here our main island, Europe, hosting our hotels. Monaco Hotel is our first hotel to open, and it's a party hotel, 24/7 party.
This is typical of Dubai, the epitome of abundance. A Switzerland beneath palm trees welcoming anyone who wants to take the wealth to the emirate. Postmodern towers soar up into the sky. They include the tallest building in the world. The Burj Khalifa skyscraper was originally going to be called Burj Dubai, but the prestigious building had to be renamed after the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khalifa. The powerful neighbor helped Dubai out with an emergency loan in 2008. The emirate, with relatively little oil, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Half-finished buildings bear witness to the credit-leveraged madness a few years ago. Instead of lavish real estate, it would have been better to invest in more sensible things, says Christoph Trebesch, Germany's sovereign debt expert.
Eine fundamentale Frage ist, ob die Schulden produktiv eingesetzt werden für Investitionen, etwa in Infrastruktur, in Bildung, in sinnvolle Projekte des Staates, oder ob sie unproduktiv eingesetzt werden, zum Beispiel in Dubai, den Immobilienboom und die dortigen Prestigeprojekte. Und da gibt es viele in der Geschichte immer wieder Episoden für unproduktiven Einsatz von Schulden, und die gehen dann oft auch mit einer Schuldenkrise einher.
When the inevitable crash hit Dubai's real estate market, many international investors pulled out. They included some who'd invested in the painstakingly created world map. Some went bankrupt. Others were left with piles of sand whose value plummeted. One even committed suicide during the debt crisis. Only Josef Kleindienst from the Kleindienst Group held out.
There are other Europeans, they did not have the trust to stay, or maybe they ran out of money or of funding, and it was not easy in 2008. I was a policeman, and as a policeman, you learn there's a crisis, everyone run away, you need to have to go there. You need to find out what's going on and you need to resolve it. And then we realized there are chances. When 40 others run away, you have a chance to take over part of their business, for example.
Even though the world keeps stalling, life is creeping into it. Recently, another investor began building on the island that represents Argentina. Time will tell whether Kleindienst was right to stick by his vision. Meanwhile, wealthy Russians are expressing interest in flashy real estate. They regard Dubai as a refuge from sanctions and war. Despite its past as a debtor, Dubai's image hasn't been tarnished. The emirate was lucky to get help so quickly.
Also Dubai ist ein gutes Beispiel, wo ein Nachbarstaat den anderen rettet in einer Finanzkrise, auch um Ansteckungseffekte zu verhindern, um politische Instabilität zu verhindern. Und das sehen wir immer wieder in der Geschichte, dass Nachbarn sich gegenseitig retten. Das haben wir auch in der Euro-Krise gesehen. Aber es ist natürlich nicht für jedes Land garantiert, dass jemand zur Seite springt, wenn es zu einer Krise kommt. Am Ende hängt das auch von der Geografie ab. Ja.
At the southernmost end of the world lies the undisputed bankruptcy champion of our planet. Argentina has been bankrupt 8 times. Sometimes international financiers stepped in. Sometimes no aid was received. We can see here what happens when a state has too much debt to meet its obligations to the poorest people. The slum called Via 31 spreads beneath the motorway bridges in central Buenos Aires. At least 30,000 people live here. We meet one of the residents, Marta Condori. She complains about the conditions in the slum.
Los habitantes del barrio pasamos muchas necesidades, muchísimas necesidades. En este barrio se ha padecido del agua, se ha padecido de la electricidad, se ha padecido de las necesidades cloacales. Yo vivo hace 23 años acá, yo y mi esposo y mis 4 hijos. Hemos construido esta casa, mi esposo es constructor, yo he sido su albañil y mi hijo también ha sido su albañil. Juntos hemos cargado los ladrillos, el cemento, la arena. Lo hemos hecho a base de mucho sacrificio, de muchísimo sacrificio. Muchas veces hasta hemos dejado de comer para conseguir el propósito que es tener nuestro techo y vivir dignamente.
Marta feels abandoned by the permanently bankrupt Argentine state.
Somos la parte rechazada y muchas veces sufrimos por eso. Yo no quiero que mis 4 hijos sufran eso y no quiero que mis vecinos sigan sufriendo esa desidia, ese abandono, esa desigualdad. Ahí tenemos el tubo de 45 euros.
Thousands of Argentines rely on charities. A century ago, Argentina was one of the 5 richest countries in the world. It has mineral resources and a well-educated population. How could such a country fall so low? Alejandro Berkovich is an economist and radio journalist. He's been studying why Argentina can't escape the debt trap.
Argentina es un país rico, pero muy desigual. Y las élites, las clases poseedoras de la Argentina, muchas veces se comportan como extranjeros ante sus propios compatriotas. Hay un comportamiento sistemático, especialmente a lo largo del siglo XX, pero históricamente desde la conformación del país, de esa élite llevándose el dinero del país, retirándolo de la Argentina. La verdad es que es un país que termina haciéndose cargo de las deudas de su élite, de su parte más rica, y socializando las pérdidas a la vez que privatiza las ganancias de los momentos buenos.
The result is ever higher deficits. And being so badly in debt, Argentina can't always borrow money abroad. But it still has to pay pensions and unemployment benefits. So it uses a trick. Argentina simply prints large amounts of its own currency, the peso. As we can see here, there's a money supply that can be used to buy goods. In order to meet the costs of the state, more and more money is printed. But the quantity of goods remains the same. People can buy more with the new money. Retailers respond to higher demand by raising their prices. Inflation takes hold. Many Argentines can't afford everyday items. So, people meet up to barter.
Nosotras con mi grupo de administración creamos el grupo hace 5 años. Hace 5 años creamos el grupo y van a ser 6. Este año en verano. Pero sí, y es un laburo de todos los días, un trabajo de todos los días. Y creció un montón. No me cobres.
Meetings are arranged on Facebook and WhatsApp, and then the group meets here.
Está lindo.
Instead of money, they use points to determine the value of each item. Clothes, for example, can then be swapped for personal hygiene items and food.
Mira, lo que se busca mucho es aceite, yerba, azúcar, lo más caro, ahora, que tendría que ser lo más racional barato. Se intercambia mucho eso, porque para pasar, harina, pisetas, lo básico que pueda ayudar de la canasta básica para vivir, ¿no? Leche.
Bartering looks set to persist for a long time. After all, inflation in Argentina is now over 80%. There is no end in sight to the price spiral.
Tranquila.
Muchas gracias.
No sé por qué algo acá y me deshidrato.
Inflation is now a serious problem in the Northern Hemisphere too. In wealthy Germany, more and more people are suffering from price rises for energy and food. The share of income that low earners spend on living costs is disproportionately high. That's why the poorest people fall into debt especially often. Duisburg is the city with the most over-indebted people in Germany. 16% of its inhabitants on the debt register, compared to not even half that many in Munich. Frank Wendler, a local jack of all trades, knows firsthand just how bad it is to be hopelessly in debt.
Mädchen mit roten Haaren, die musst du fragen, was Liebe ist.
Mir macht das nach wie vor riesen Spaß. Deswegen mache ich noch neue Produktionen, auch was die Musik betrifft. Die Musikgeschichte war ja immer nur ein zweites Bein eigentlich. Es ist schwer in der Musikszene, es gibt einfach zu viele. Und sind nur wenige, die das Glück haben, die wirklich davon gut leben könnten. Da braucht man schon einen Hit. Ja, den habe ich noch nicht gehabt. Ja, und ich habe mich damals, will ich sagen, fast aus der Not heraus selbstständig gemacht, nachdem ich arbeitslos war.
Keine Chance, nicht mal eine für uns zwei. Auf geht's!
For decades, Wendler sold gas canisters. But the business had its pitfalls.
Ich muss sagen, von Haus aus mehr ein Mensch, der so praktisch veranlagt ist. Ich mache alles, ich kann Waschmaschinen reparieren oder sonst was, egal. Aber dieser ganze Bürokratismus, Büro und Co. war noch nie so wirklich mein Ding. Dann irgendwann keine Steuererklärung mehr abgegeben, weil man war auch irgendwo überlastet, überfordert.
Fate took its course. After a tax audit, he owed a large amount of back tax.
Ich bin schon wieder in der Hölle.
Damals kamen in den 5 Jahren zusammen, wenn ich das nur so halbwegs im Kopf habe, ich glaube so 65.000. Und dann durch Zinsen und Zinseszins summiert sich das. Ich habe das Geld ja logischerweise nicht gehabt. Naja, dann haben die mich irgendwann so an die Wand gedrückt, dass ich dann irgendwann das Gewerbe abgemeldet habe oder abmelden musste. Und dann habe ich dann wirklich alles hingeschmissen, Burnout gehabt. Ja, war dann alles zu viel dann irgendwann, ja.
Like its citizens, Duisburg is also struggling with a debt trap. Starting with the crisis in the steel industry in the mid-1980s, things went downhill. And the once affluent city now has an army of unemployed. This change led to a string of problems that Duisburg's chief financial officer, Martin Morak, is still struggling with.
In dem Moment, wo die Arbeitslosigkeit ansteigt, steigen die Sozialkosten, die die Städte zu schultern haben. Und in dem Moment, wo dann eben das Geld nicht ausreicht, müssen Städte gegensteuern. Das heißt, man muss entsprechend die Ausgaben senken. Weniger Instandhaltung, weniger Personal auf städtischer Ebene. Dadurch wird eine Stadt natürlich in Gänze auch unattraktiver, sowohl für Investoren als auch für Bewohner. Und die Steuern mussten angehoben werden. Das heißt, Gewerbesteuer und Grundsteuer sind wirklich auf ein absolutes Hoch angewonnen. Und das ist so eine Negativspirale, die dort eingesetzt hat, was dazu geführt hat, dass wir im Endeffekt eine Verschuldung von wirklich 1,8 Milliarden Euro hatten. Und das war dann wirklich der Höhepunkt dieser Negativspirale.
The start of a downward spiral can be seen all over the country. Germany has been systematically saving for decades. The debt level is low. But the result is potholes, bridges in need of repair, and run-down railways. With Duisburg's drastic cuts now behind it, a consolidation pact has been introduced to make the city more attractive for investors. Nearly half of its debt has been paid off, partly thanks to the development of Duisburg as a logistics hub. The port of Duisburg is the biggest inland port in the world. It lies at the end of the Northern Silk Road, a branch of a huge trade network being set up by China to connect with the rest of the world. In Duisburg, money is being pumped into the debt-laden budget by cooperation with China. But Chinese collaboration isn't always this beneficial for its partners.
Bei Chinas Auslandsaktivitäten kann man so eine gewisse Typologie erkennen. In reichen Ländern, etwa in Deutschland, funktioniert die Seidenstraße vor allem über Investitionen. In Entwicklungsländern gibt es ein Gesamtpaket. Da werden also große Infrastrukturprojekte aufgelegt, die zum Teil auch wirklich benötigt werden. Die werden von chinesischen Unternehmen gebaut und von chinesischen Staatsbanken über Schulden finanziert.
This map shows hard-up countries that built infrastructure for the Silk Road by taking out huge loans from Chinese banks. China expert Thomas Heberer is aware that China's loans can also have a positive effect.
Also das ist etwas, was man im Kopf behalten muss, dass die Infrastruktur in Ländern, die sonst keine Mittel dafür haben, natürlich geschaffen wird. Wir haben das Beispiel die Zugverbindung Addis Abeba nach Djibouti zum Hafen. Äthiopien hat ja selber keinen eigenen Hafen, oder von Mombasa nach Nairobi. Und es soll ausgebaut werden auf 5 weitere afrikanische Länder. Das sind positive Dinge und das sollte man auch nicht vergessen, wenn man über Afrika spricht.
This is how economic growth is created in Africa. However, China grants loans without assessing whether the recipients can manage the money properly. Heberer finds this problematic.
Das ist etwas, was man in dieser Seidenstraßenpolitik Chinas auch kritisieren kann, nämlich dass Projekte finanziert werden, die Prestigeprojekte von Präsidenten afrikanischer Länder sind, große Stadien oder Paradeplätze oder sonst etwas, die auch finanziert werden müssen und letztendlich diese Schuldenfalle verstärken.
In Europe, too, some projects are questionable. In Montenegro, a Chinese company built the country's first motorway. Over a length of 170 kilometers, it required 40 bridges and 90 tunnels.
Diese Straße führte überwiegend über Gebirge und von daher war es ein ausgesprochen teures Projekt. Die chinesischen Unternehmen, die das bauen wollten, haben dafür über eine chinesische Bank 1 Milliarde US-Dollar zur Verfügung gestellt. Das entspricht etwa 1/5 des Bruttoinlandsprodukts von Montenegro. Und mit dem Einbruch des Tourismus und der Corona-Krise, kann man sagen, war Montenegro auch nicht mehr in der Lage, diese Kredite zu bedienen. Der montenegrische Präsident hat angeboten, dass er statt Zinsen und Tilgung einen Teil eines montenegrischen Hafens den chinesischen Betreibern zur Verfügung stellt. Aber auch auf Druck der Europäischen Union hat das Montenegro da nicht gemacht.
The liabilities have since been transferred to 3 Western banks. The port remains in Montenegro's possession. But no one knows how the debt will be repaid. From the small republic in the Balkans, we travel to the heartland of capitalism. In the US, where people think big, debts are breaking all records. During the COVID pandemic, the state's obligations skyrocketed. The debt clock currently reads $31 trillion. That equates to debts of $93,000 per head of population. This amount is still rising and has serious consequences for society, says banker Richard Vague.
Growth in debt increases inequality. The reason is that the top 10% of most economies, certainly in the United States, own 60 to 70% of the real estate and stock in that economy. Increased debt levels increase the value of real estate. and increase the value of stocks.
Financial expert Sandra Navidi understands the impact of unequal wealth distribution on US society.
Die Arbeitskraft kann nie so viel Geld generieren wie diese Vermögenswerte. Das heißt, um das auszugleichen und dann noch einigermaßen gut leben zu können, nimmt man Schulden auf, gerade auch hier beliebt in den USA. Durch diese Verschuldung steht man unheimlich unter Druck hier. Beide Familien, also Vater und Mutter, müssen beide arbeiten. Sie müssen zum Teil mehrere Jobs arbeiten. Die kalte Hand der Gläubiger sitzt ihnen im Nacken. Sie müssen die Schulden bedienen, damit sie ihr Haus nicht verlieren, damit sie ihre Kreditkarten abbezahlen können. Das heißt, es leidet auch die Lebensqualität darunter. Man ist nicht mehr frei, Entscheidungen zu treffen, sondern alles ordnet sich unter, um diese Schulden bedienen zu können.
The weakest in society suffer the most. Mississippi has the highest proportion of poverty in the USA. Known debtors make up 29% of the population, 7 percentage points higher than the national average. For Anita's husband, severe debt led to drastic repercussions.
Years ago, me and my husband, we were going through financial difficulty. He wasn't working. I was working. I was in between paychecks because I started a new job as an office manager. One morning I came into work. My truck was being repossessed. Another coworker came in and she said, "I'm gonna tell you what to do." She said, "Write a check for John Doe for $365, get the cash, then when you get paid, replace the cash." Okay, so I did that, and payday comes, and of course, I have a million other bills, so I didn't replace the cash back. So, I'm thinking in my head, okay, this is pretty easy. So I started, forming a habit. I would keep my paycheck, and I would pay my light bill with the fake checks or the fraudulent checks.
Altogether, Anita embezzled $13,000. Her larceny was found out. She was sentenced to 5 years probation and had to pay back the money. She was in a mess because she lost her job. Her husband suffered a stroke and was confined to bed. Anita regularly reported to the probation officer. In return for his services, he expected fees.
They have what they call a supervision fee. We have to pay $60 a month. I didn't have it. I didn't even pay on the $13,000 restitution. No one's working. So the probation officer said, "Well, if you don't have it, that is a violation of your probation because you have to report and pay." So I'm not going to leave my basically paralyzed husband, 3 little kids home, so I'm not going to come back.
Anita was arrested and put in a restitution center. This means a debt prison in Jackson, Mississippi, where prisoners serve time until they've worked off their debts. These debts might be damages owed to victims of crime or overdue court costs. Even for trifling amounts below $1,000, people can end up in this converted motel. But it has nothing to do with holiday accommodation.
It's barbed wire, just like a jail. When you get in, they go through your stuff, just like a jail, a prison. They strip search you, just like a prison. And I never forget this. They brought me there on a Friday. Mother's Day was on a Sunday. So they allowed me one call. I called my son, my oldest son, and the first thing he said was, "Happy Mother's Day, Mother." And that was so heartbreaking because I'm not going to be there.
Besides the prison-like conditions in the restitution center, Anita was in for another shock. She was charged $11 a day for board and lodging, which was added to her debts. Inmates even had to pay when the center was seeking employment for them, no matter how long it took. Anita was relieved to get a part-time job at Church's Chicken, a fast food restaurant. Accompanied by her daughter-in-law, she drives to her former place of work. The branch is in a particularly bad area.
The Church's Chicken I worked at, you can't sit down there and eat. You have to take everything to go, and you talk, to them behind a glass.
Okay, so it's not a dine-in like most traditional.
And the glass was bulletproof because they had been robbed so many times.
Wow.
Do you smell Churches?
Yes. The
Yeah,
smell of the
it.
grease, the fried chicken.
Yeah. That smell brings back memories. First, I didn't think anything about it. It wasn't gonna faze me, no big deal. But then it's like I'm standing here and I'm picturing myself
here still.
In there, I really see that. It's lunchtime now,
It'd be the rush going on.
The prisoners to the prison.
Anita remembers that she had high hopes of escaping the system. By doing additional tasks, she earned valuable bonus points that could be used to reduce her time in custody. But she had a rude awakening.
I was, scrubbing vans. I was working in the cafeteria. I was doing everything. Got my merits. So I went to the warden, and she read my sentencing paper. Now here I'm thinking all I had to do is get, so many merits, and I can go back to my normal life. She said, no, you have to stay here until $13,000 is paid off.
With a part-time hourly wage of $7.25, less detention costs, Anita's release was a distant prospect. It became apparent that she'd have to serve the maximum term of 5 years in Jackson. Mississippi is joined by states like Iran, Egypt, and Afghanistan that also imprison debtors. Nowhere else does being in debt lead to incarceration. We're interested in finding out what sort of people employ debtors like Anita from the restitution center. Businesswoman KK Kent has several decades' experience of such temporary workers.
When I was 19, I bought my first rental properties, and a lot of them had to be excavated, remodeled, and it was hard to find labor, especially labor that was sober. So the restitution center opened up here in Greenwood when I was 19. And I used to go and get labor to help me do all my day-to-day operations, handle my livestock, cows, horses, load hay, load feed, unload feed, just stuff you have to do every day when you're on a farm.
KK Kent has prospered and has more work than ever. She's an enterprising woman who's opened a shop and a restaurant. She also runs an animal shelter because she feels sorry for strays and abandoned animals. But the staff she recruits from the restitution center cause her problems.
And I may go through 4 or 5 before I find one that I'm compatible and I can work with. Because a lot of them think they're entitled. And as soon as you pick them up, they start asking, can I use your phone? Will you stop at the store and buy me a drink? Will you buy me some cigarettes? And there's been some that I've picked up and hadn't even driven a half a mile that just their demeanor I didn't approve of it, and I turned around and took them right back and sent them back in and got 2 more. Well, if they come to me with an open mind and a hard work ethic, they can learn a lot because I can teach them. I've taught a lot of them plumbing. I've taught a lot of them gardening. I've taught a lot of them yard work. And people pay a lot of money this day and time to have somebody come work in their yards.
Apart from instructions, KK also takes the salvation of her workers to heart.
There were a few that wanted Bibles, so I asked for some Bibles on my social media page, and a lot of people brought some to my restaurant. A few of them, they'll take the Bibles and they'll pull the pages out and use them to wrap up tobacco, to make like a jailhouse cigarette, which that infuriates me. First of all, doing that to the Bible, and secondly, they're just abused the kindness of somebody who went out of their way to do something for them. Some are very appreciative, some are thankful, grateful for everything you do for them. You know, I've had some of them say, you know, if I had a mom like you growing up, you know, my life would have been totally different. I don't try to cure them. I just tell them, you know, you need to pray about yourself. You need to figure out your own self-discipline and do something about yourself. You don't need to look for other people because it's not other people's problem, your problem.
Anita's husband was in over her head with her problems. She had to think of something. Otherwise, given the amount of money she owed, it would be years before she was released.
$13,000 with a minimum part-time paying job. I said, Anita, you need a plan. You know, you need a plan, you need a plan. I just took my chances and ran.
But the challenges were huge. She was only allowed to leave to go to work. She was strictly searched twice a day. And she only got $10 a week for personal use.
They used to give us a roll of quarters. You couldn't have dollars. So every morning, I would wear my hair in a ponytail. I would put the roll of quarters in my hair, because, you know, in between the ponytail, and I would leave with the roll of quarters. Come back, I would change the quarters for dollars. I would roll the dollars or 2 5s, put it in my hair, because I can get change at work. I hand wash my clothes, you know, stuff that I would take the $10 for, I would, you know, do without. So I saved up enough for a bus ticket. This one particular day I planned to leave. I had on my church's uniform, but I had on a pair of blue jeans and a shirt under my church's chicken uniform. So I got a friend to take me to the bus station, and I got on the bus and I came to Biloxi.
Eventually, Anita was arrested there and had to serve part of her suspended sentence in an ordinary prison. After 9 months, she was released. Her debts were cancelled. She doesn't have a good word to say about the system of restitution centers.
My debt was pretty large, but there's been people that's been at the restitution with maybe a $2,000 debt, and 3 years later, they're still in the restitution. You say, well, one day I'm going to get to go home and, you know, be with my family, but you don't know when. I feel like restitution centers should be wiped out. It's just an undercover slavery.
Is the fate of people like Anita actually part of a perfidious system to deliberately exploit debtors? Working off debt under duress certainly has a long, wretched history in the USA. Sociologist Frederick Wherry sees parallels with the end of slavery in 1865.
So imagine you suddenly have more than 4 million African Americans who are told you are no longer enslaved. And you also have an economic system that has relied on that labor. This created a crisis. How are you going to keep those plantations running, keep those factories going when you can no longer compel people to work for you? And the answer to that was debt. Debt saved the economy. And the way that it saved the economy is that the one thing that also happened at the end of the Civil War is that a number of states started implementing what they called black codes. And so these were rules that were put in place so that minor behavioral infractions would be the basis for putting someone in jail. And so those infractions included things like using profanity, lewd behavior, committing adultery, and the list goes on. And when they would be taken to the court, if they didn't have bail money, then they were off onto the chain gang or in prison. And these employers would show up to the courts and say, I will bail you out. I will pay for your bail, allow you to not go to prison, but you'll need to work for me for a period of time in order to pay me back. And so these people who were told, you are now free, discover that they are now no longer free. They are now bound by a contract. And so this was a way of making sure that that labor was tamed and it was brought to heel.
The systemic discrimination of black people after slavery continues to this day. It's not just the neglected cemeteries of the freed slaves, like this one in New Jersey, that bear witness to this. More than a quarter of blacks can't get loans at all, compared to just 17% of whites. And in black neighborhoods, debt collectors pursue debtors especially often and hard. Court cases are more frequent than for whites. Differences in the USA concern not only skin color, but also generations. In the majority white middle class, 20-somethings are groaning under tuition fees, which are higher than ever. One of them is Cassandra Jones, who studied at New York University.
I studied public health, and I really want to help people, and that's the whole reason why I furthered my education. And it feels very ironic to go to one of the best institutions in the world, study something that is meaningful, needed, and impactful, and still be struggling to pay my rent each month and put food on my table.
The cost of student loans in the US is rising sharply. In 2006, American students owed $500 billion in student loan debt. This figure has since risen to $1.7 trillion, as much as Italy's GDP. For people like Cassandra, this is a huge debt burden.
The total amount of my debt when I graduated was $167,000, and I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to afford to pay for it. A roommate of mine actually told me that she had donated her eggs. I was able to watch the process of her egg donations, and she was able to make anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 in a month. So It felt like a very creative solution to a problem that I couldn't find support in, I didn't find any answers to. I was terrified to donate. It is an invasive procedure. They do put you to sleep through it, and you have to give yourself injections over the course of like 10 days to 14 days. I've experienced everything from bloating to night sweats to changes in sex drive, mood swings. I mean, there's a lot of different symptoms that have occurred.
The financial pressure on Cassandra was relentless, so she endured the procedure 4 more times.
The whole reason why I felt comfortable donating so many times is because my body rebounded. But after the 4th donation, I noticed some changes that were lasting. And now definitely after this last donation, I felt like my body was put through hell. Those last couple of donations were purely out of desperation. But at this point, it feels like I've barely made a dent. And that mountain of debt is still a very heavy burden to carry.
Debt problems like Cassandra's mean that many young people in the USA can't plan their futures in the way their parents did.
When I was 18, and being the oldest of 4, coming from a big family, I actually used to think that I'll be a mom myself one day, and I'll have kids of my own one day. I'll get married, I'll be able to afford a house one day. And my entire viewpoint on that has changed. It's not exactly something that is now a priority for me, and I think a lot of young people have been forced to shift their priorities. So I don't feel like I have a choice anyway, so I might as well put this to bed and be at peace with the fact that I may not be a mom.
In den USA sehen wir, dass die Mittelschicht in den letzten 20 bis 30 Jahren kaum Einkommenszuwächse hatte. Also wir sehen da eine wirkliche Stagnation. Gleichzeitig steigen die Schulden immer weiter an, weil Gesundheit, Bildung immer teurer werden zu finanzieren. Und wenn ich also stagnierende Einkommen habe und gleichzeitig wachsende Schuldenstände, dann kommt es bei immer mehr Haushalten zu Überschuldungssituationen, zu Verarmungssituationen. Und dieser American Dream, den gibt es kaum noch. Es schaffen nur sehr, sehr wenige Leute aus der Mittelschicht, sich wirklich hochzuarbeiten und dann auch aus ihren Schulden so rauszuwachsen. Es ist also eine sehr schwierige Situation für weite Teile der amerikanischen Bevölkerung in den letzten 20 bis 30 Jahren.
But some lucky people don't get stuck on a treadmill of repayments. The USA is also a country of smart solutions. In Texas, we meet a woman who had to find a creative way out of her debts.
My name is Allie Eve Knox. I have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree. My student loan debt was insane, like over $100,000. And it was one of those things where I was like working all the time for a job that I had gone to grad school for. And I had like $10 left at the end of each month. And it was one of those things where I never there was never a time in the future when I could think about something being different. I support my brother, and so it was not an option to be broke. So I had to figure out another way out of debt. And that was just to make more money. So I started hustling, and it started working. I'll show it to you. So these are some of my various work things. I have dog masks, chastity devices, big dicks, chains and leather. I am a fetish performer and content creator. So I do things like live cam, sell videos, subscription services, that kind of thing, everything in the adult arena. I'm specialized in financial domination. So it's a lot of dominating men's finances. So it's a thing where it's not just a power control. It's not just I take your money. It's more of a long-term relationship that we have between each other where I'm gonna benefit and you're gonna work very, very hard for me.
Ali's clients present her lavish gifts, like expensive designer clothes. They also make regular tribute payments. Ali's money slaves, also known as pay pigs, are completely under her thumb.
Pretty smart, perfect girls like me shouldn't have to do anything.
Because men like you are just sitting there waiting to serve. Start spending, start sending. Make it where I never have to work again. I want to be in the will, right? I want the houses and the cars and this like extended life. That's really what I'm looking for. Like I want the ones that are going to completely devote their life to serving me. It gives them a purpose. It makes them work harder or work smarter or work stronger or whatever. I don't care what kind of pain you feel or what you had to go through to get the things that I want. I still want them. And I know that you're going to give me everything over and over and over and over again.
Ali has the power to ruin her pay pigs, but she'd rather educate her indebted clients to be responsible with their money.
I'm not into people worsening their lives to better mine. I want someone that's going to make smarter decisions. So if it's not going to Starbucks every single morning, or if it's you go to the gym because you're going to live longer, like these types of things where they make investments in themselves, there's a training that goes on here, right? It's training them to be what I want. And that's a more productive fucking person in society. I don't want them to be going into debt and worrying about how they're going to pay me next month.
Ali has arranged to meet Nick online. He's totally devoted to her in every aspect of his life.
All right, so tell them about the morning of the tornado coming through your house. What did you wake up and do?
I woke up and I
Tell them what happened.
Okay, on July 29th, a tornado hit my house. Totally obliterated it.
And you had lost everything.
So I wake up the next morning, and I sent you some money. It was just an automatic thing to do, and I'm like, so it was just sort of trying to get some control of some normalcy back in my life, which is,
And then you didn't tell me that a tornado had wrecked your house until after you had paid me.
Yes, that is true.
A little sneaky.
I didn't tell a lot of people, but,
Why do you want to put me in your life insurance?
Because you mean a lot to me. And I just want to make sure that eventually when that happens, good things come to you. So my kids are aware of the situation. So, I mean, they get part of it too, but
Yeah.
they're aware. Yeah, so.
Thank you for meeting with me. This was very sweet of you.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. Whatever I can do to help you, make your life easier, I'm there for you.
Yeah. I appreciate you, Nick. You did a great job. You're a very good boy.
Thank you.
Thanks to men like Nick, Ali now has plenty of time for an unusual hobby.
So I started this dollhouse and it just morphed into this huge thing. And I made a lot of this stuff. I made this little dungeon bed. A TikTok fan made this for me and sent me a little paddle.
Ali wouldn't be Ali if she didn't make money out of it too.
I took this content and I sold it initially before I put it on my social media. So I made about $2,000. for people contributing and wanting to see what I was up to. I have a TikTok that's my thirst traps, and it's like 98% men. And then I have a TikTok that's my art, and it's 98% women. So it was my way to like kind of sneak this sex worky type of vibe into a mainstream.
Thanks to her many sources of money, Ali is now completely debt-free. Anyone who can drastically increase their income and get out of debt is sitting pretty. Sadly, Ali's solution isn't universal. It certainly doesn't work for indebted countries. Higher government revenues often mean higher taxes. But this is often counterproductive.
If the government taxes individuals, it means those individuals are able to spend less. And a government uses that to pay off debt, the government itself is not using those tax dollars to spend more, so the math is obvious. The folks being taxed spend less, the government spending the same, GDP shrinks. So tax where you repay debt actually contracts GDP and creates the opposite effect that you want.
But what about starting with government spending? Couldn't states just save like mad until their debts have disappeared?
Ein weiteres Mittel, aus Schulden herauszukommen, ist Sparen. Das ist ja das Mantra der Deutschen. Wir müssen unsere Ausgaben zurückschrauben, wir müssen sparsam sein. Und im Grunde genommen, wenn eine Wirtschaft sehr verschuldet ist, ist sie auch fragiler und anfälliger. Und häufig, wenn man dann noch Sparmaßnahmen einführt, dann führt das zu größerer Arbeitslosigkeit, die Wirtschaft wird gedrosselt. Also häufig bewirkt das das Gegenteil von dem, was man eigentlich erreichen will.
Much of what looks like a solution can actually be harmful. If so, how can we get control of the global debt problem? Perhaps there are old ideas outside the world of finance. This leads us to a synagogue in Brooklyn. Sandra Navidi meets the rabbi, Emily Cohen.
So I guess you could say that debt isn't anything new in society. If we go back all the way to some of our earliest texts, this is a Torah scroll, which we've had in the Jewish world for thousands of years at this point. In the text, you find this discussion of debt. If you can grab the cover, keep going. Okay. So there's a concept in the book of Leviticus that then is echoed in the book of Deuteronomy called Shemitah. And what Shemitah is a land rest. It's this idea that for 6 years you plant grain, you plant your crops, you harvest them as you normally would, and then in the 7th year you don't plant anything. It's a time where the land is supposed to get a chance to reset, and as part of that process, as part of that reset, there's also remission of debt. So there's this idea that any debt that you have, that you've taken on during the 6 years leading up to the Shemitah year, is released in the 7th year.
It is unlikely that this debt remission was ever implemented to the letter.
But the ideal of this, the ideal of saying that people sometimes will be in debt, that there will be people who are in need, and that ultimately that can't be something that continues forever. I think that that ideal is something to strive for, even if we haven't figured out how yet. And so one way that's happening this year is that I have colleagues, I know of one for sure in Philadelphia and some other places as well, that have been raising funds during this Shemitah year to relieve medical debt, which is a huge problem in the United States, and something that feels just immoral on every level. So again, I don't know how we do this. I don't know how we take the Torah with all of its complexity and its sometimes less than fully universalistic perspectives and make it something that we can apply, but I hope we can one day.
Objectors claim that debt remission might be an invitation to get recklessly into debt. But financial experts disagree.
So the moral hazard argument is the one that is always advanced. If we give an inch, borrowers will take a mile. Irresponsible behavior will proliferate. And yet when we examine the facts, we see that that's not the case. Bankruptcy is a miserable experience in the best of circumstances for the average individual borrower. It's not something they go into lightly. And in fact, when we examine bankruptcy, it relates to just 2 or 3 key things most of the time. Unexpected health emergency, unexpected job loss, and divorce. If those are the things that constitute, almost all bankruptcies, that's not evidence that there's folks out there purposely, listen, I'll lose my job or I'll have a healthcare emergency in order to get out of my debt. It just doesn't happen.
Debt cuts for individuals are often advisable out of compassion, but they also make sense for the general public.
Die Forschung in den letzten Jahren hat gezeigt, dass das Schicksal vieler einzelnen Haushalte sehr wichtig ist für das Gesamtsystem. Also wir haben etwa in der Finanzkrise viel zu sehr auf die großen Banken geschaut, dort große Rettungspakete aufgelegt. Und Forschung in den USA zeigt, dass es effektiver gewesen wäre, bei den Haushalten, bei den Privatleuten anzusetzen, die zu entschulden, die zu mehr Konsum zu animieren und da anzusetzen, also eher Privatleute retten als Banken. Das ist tatsächlich, gibt es einige faszinierende Arbeiten, die das sehr systematisch zeigen können.
We're back in Duisburg, the stronghold of debt. One of those who's undergone personal bankruptcy is Frank Wendler. The pop singer and failed gas retailer was overwhelmed by a mountain of debt. Eventually, he contacted debt counselor Adam Kafora, who helped him file for personal bankruptcy.
Ah, Herr Wendler, ich grüße Sie. Wie geht's Ihnen?
Ja,
bitte nehmen Sie Platz.
Ja. Ach ja, ist ja schön, dass man
Haben Sie was Schönes mitgebracht? Wie geht's Ihnen überhaupt?
Ja, soweit jetzt ganz gut.
Ja.
Ich habe es jetzt langsam realisiert, dass es wohl läuft, die Insolvenz. Von daher. Also.
Das ist Insolvenzverwalter eingeschaltet gewesen. Das ist alles gelaufen.
Ja.
Das haben die eröffnet. Wunderbar, so wie es sein soll.
Ja.
Das waren einige Schulden, ne? Das waren um die 100.000.
Ja, das hat sich ja summiert. Das waren ja damals 2009 ca. 65. Und dann hat sich das natürlich in den 10 Jahren...
Von 65.000 auf 100.000, glaube ich.
Ja, über 100.
Oder 100.
Ja, oder 120.
Die ganzen Gebühren, die ganzen
durch die ganzen
Aufschläge.
Gebühren, ja klar.
Da muss man sich reintun, ja.
Ja, klar.
Wie soll man denn sonst aus den Schulden rauskommen?
Ja,
das
keine
ist
Chance.
Unmöglich. Wie belastend ist das denn für Sie gewesen, nochmal diese ganzen Schulden mit sich zu tragen?
Ja, es ist schon insofern belastend, weil man ist ja nicht mehr frei. Ja, man schleppt das mit sich rum und hat keine Chance mehr, mit dem Hintern hochzukommen.
Was passiert danach?
Richtig.
Genau das, was ich gesagt habe.
Ja.
Gerichtsvollzieher, psychischer Druck, Angst vor dem Briefkasten. Haben Sie auch Angst vor dem Briefkasten?
Ja. Da kam auch so ein Déjà-vu hier. Ich gehe so über die Straße und dann steht da einer vor der Haustüre mit seiner Post
und sehe so einen gelben Brief.
Mann.
Und da ging mir das dann direkt wieder durch den Kopf. Boah, das war für mich so ein Hass da drauf irgendwo. Ja. Wie viele Briefe ich davon hatte. Ja.
Ich weiß, als sie zu uns kamen, da haben wir erstmal den Ordner nochmal angeschaut. Und da haben wir uns mal überlegt, haben wir bei so hoher Summe, bei über 100.000, haben wir gesagt, gut, Privatinsolvenz. Und da sind sie aus der Nummer einfach raus.
Ja, und man hat wieder so ein bisschen...
Sieht man Licht im Tunnel.
Ja, so ein bisschen Licht im Tunnel, wo man dann auch sagen kann, okay, jetzt kannst du wenigstens wieder ein bisschen leben, jetzt kannst du arbeiten.
Genau.
Du hast nicht mehr den Druck im Nacken. Ja.
Okay, ich hab einen gesucht nach dir.
After 3 years, Frank Wendler will be debt-free. He's found a new rewarding job as an ambulance driver. And in his private life too, things have taken a turn for the better.
Habe dann später meine jetzige Frau kennengelernt, die ich vor 2 Jahren dann geheiratet habe.
Ich hab gesucht nach dir, geträumt von dir.
So ist das Leben im Moment, ja. Die Musik auch nicht dran gegeben, mache ich natürlich auch weiter, soweit es geht und die Zeit ist, weil es einfach so viel Spaß macht. Ja,
ja, jetzt bist du hier, ganz nah bei mir. Dankeschön, Dankeschön. Sehr lieb von euch, Dankeschön.
Die Forschung in den letzten Jahren hat gezeigt, dass es bei privater Überschuldung wichtig ist, schnell einzugreifen durch Insolvenzverfahren, durch staatliche Rettungspakete. Das hat gesamtwirtschaftlich sehr positive Effekte. Also man sollte da nicht zu lange warten. Dasselbe gilt auch für Staaten. Ein solcher Schuldenschnitt ist eine sehr effektive Art und Weise, eine Schuldenkrise zu lösen. Investoren sind dann wieder bereit, in das Land zu gehen. Auch im Land ist eine höhere Bereitschaft, wieder zu investieren. Und dadurch kommt das Wachstum zurück. Und dann kann man auch aus dem Rest der Schulden herauswachsen. Beispiele sind Uruguay Anfang der 2000er. Da war die Krise in 1,5 Jahren bewältigt. Oder auch Ecuador jetzt in der Corona-Krise. Das wurde innerhalb von wenigen Monaten wurde der Schuldenschnitt verhandelt. Und die haben jetzt die Krise auch schon überwunden.
Debt relief can also be beneficial for insolvent companies. This can be seen here at the Bantanza cooking oil factory in Argentina. In 2016, the company slid into bankruptcy, but the workers refused to give up.
¿Cómo va? ¿Cómo va? ¿Todo bien? Todo bien. ¿Qué van a hacer hoy? Hoy estamos procesando girasol y nos juntamos en 3 compañeros un día y le dijimos vamos a dar para adelante. Y lo damos con todo el esfuerzo. Fue un sacrificio enorme que hicimos.
The workers formed a cooperative and took legal action to take control of the factory. The squatters shrewdly invoked the fact that employment contracts in Argentina are usually open-ended.
En la Argentina hay una ley que ampara al trabajador que tiene un derecho, que es la continuidad laboral, de hacer la continuación laboral.
A new start was only possible if the factory's debts were written off. The creditors were persuaded, but the court had its doubts.
No somos empresarios ni somos apoderados, no tenemos solvencia económica. Y entonces como que te cierran las puertas de todos lados y fue muy difícil. Fue dormir en el juzgado, acampar en el juzgado, hacer fuerza por que el juez te diga no, hoy no te puedo atender, que le duele la panza, que el otro día no vino. Insistir hasta llegar a poder concretar esto.
With the courage of despair, the workers persevered despite all the obstacles. In the end, only 20 were left, a sixth of the original workforce.
Y esa etapa fue medio caótica, que fue más o menos casi un año. Y fuimos con eso remándola, cocinando en grupo acá en la fábrica, y así lo íbamos pasando lentamente.
Impressed by the workers' tenacity, the court ruled they could be trusted to run the factory. The suppliers were also willing to do business with the new owners. Today, the company has 90 employees again. Its edible oil is popular. Debt relief has helped everyone. The former factory squatters are content.
Y hoy tenemos una imagen bastante buena en el mercado, o sea, uno pregunta a la aceitera La Matanza y bueno, se sacan el sombrero hablando de nosotros. Y creo que hicimos mucho, hicimos trabajos cooperativos, hacen talleres para el barrio también, hacemos trabajo cooperativo comunitario, digamos.
Like the workers from Matanza, the world needs a fresh start with generous debt relief. But even if all the debts in the world were written off, how could the endless cycle of over-indebtedness snapping shut every few years be stopped? Is it possible to imagine a world in which much less debt is incurred? In the African neighborhood in Paris, known as Goutte d'Or, they're looking for an answer. Aita Magassa, who runs an estate agency for homes in Africa, believes in a traditional solution. Her clients, all French citizens of African origin, had problems investing in Africa. The banks refused to get involved.
C'est vrai que quand on va voir les banques elles vont pas accepter tout de suite de dire oui parce que déjà en général c'est pour un investissement en Afrique. Elles sont très frileuses. Et les banques en Afrique, la problématique des banques en Afrique, c'est que leurs taux d'intérêt sont très élevés. Et donc voilà, ça commence à 8 et ça peut monter à 13, même voire 20%. Et donc il fallait trouver une autre solution alternative. Et la solution alternative a été celle-ci, c'est de pouvoir permettre à des personnes qui ont envie d'acheter un terrain, regrouper toutes ces personnes-là, par exemple faire un groupe de 20 personnes qui vont cotiser tous les mois la même somme, comme pour les tontines.
Tontines are traditional African saving schemes where women join together and pay in a fixed amount at each meeting. Each time, the money collected is distributed to one of the participants, who can spend it as she chooses. Aita Magassa applied the centuries-old system of tontine to property purchases.
Moi, j'ai su trouver quelque chose qui s'adapte plus au continent africain, avec les solutions des tontines. Parce que les personnes de la communauté africaine, elles connaissent déjà ce système-là. C'est un système qui est traditionnel, ancré dans les mœurs, qu'on connaît. Il fallait juste en fait le professionnaliser, le rendre en fait avec un contrat, le contractualiser, le rendre formel. Vous pouvez le faire.
It states that Aita's clients must pay in 250 euros every month. In turn, 5,000 euros will be distributed to each of the 20 group members to finance a house or land in Africa. None of her clients has to go into debt for a home. This is an unbeatable advantage over the usual financing system.
Accéder à des prêts bancaires ou autres, c'est quelque chose qui se fait depuis des années, mais qui crée un taux d'endettement énorme pour les personnes, pour le monde, et elle n'est pas accessible à tout le monde. Donc, tout le reste du monde qui n'a pas accès à ça, il fallait leur trouver des solutions.
We learned that the principle of tontine also works in Europe at Phyllis Sidibe's hairdressing salon. Aita visits the resourceful lady, for whom a bank loan was never an option to finance the shop.
C'est pas ça, on peut pas aller prendre des dettes à la banque parce que de un, ils vont te demander des documents Et ça, ça fait mon deuxième salon.
D'accord. Ah, c'est ton deuxième?
Oui, que c'est grâce à la tontine.
Et avec la
tontine.
financée. Et ça fait plaisir d'entendre ça. Donc, en fait, en plein Paris, tu as 2 salons que tu as financés sans les banques.
Ouais.
It's not just Philly who's benefited from the system, but many other people she knows.
Par exemple, mon coiffeur, lui, il est dedans, les tailleurs et tout le monde est dedans. Donc, c'est dans notre entourage.
C'est un réseau, quoi.
C'est un réseau. Il faut connaître.
Top. Ouais, mais en fait, ce qui est bien, c'est que vous vous motivez les uns les autres. Donc, les gens qui entrent dans ta tontine, tes tontines, en tout cas, ce sont des gens qui vont faire des projets.
Ouais, c'est grâce à la tontine. C'est pas magique et tout, c'est rien. C'est grâce à la tontine.
These 2 women show how our financial system can become more people-friendly. But a world without any debt at all might be illusory. Perhaps it's not even desirable.
Eine Welt ohne Schulden ist letztendlich eine Welt ohne Kapitalismus. Und der Kapitalismus hat trotz all seiner Probleme uns sehr viel Wohlstand gebracht. Dank dieses fehlerhaften Systems geht es uns so gut wie noch nie zuvor. Das gilt nicht nur für reiche Länder, das gilt besonders auch für die Entwicklungs- und Schwellenländer, die in den letzten Jahrzehnten enorm aufgeholt haben. Dank des Handels, dank Kapitalismus und als im Zentrum dieses Systems stecken oft Schulden, stecken oft die Möglichkeit von Staaten auch zu investieren in Infrastruktur, in Bildung, in die Zukunft des Landes.
Not everyone benefits from our system, and debt has become a trap for many. The world must act in everybody's interest, because behind all debts are human beings and human destinies.